I actually bounced off Lost Ark for the first bit. Yeah, I really did, and I was kind of surprised about that. But now, a good few more hours later, no, I'm actually in. I'm more than in, I'm very on board. It's an interesting game, and it's an odd game in how it starts. I have a feeling a lot of people will have just sort of thought, whoa, what's going on? And then a few things happen, you notice a few things, and you're just in there for the experience. I mean, I didn't play the beta. I didn't play the Russian version. I didn't play the Korean version. I didn't do any of those things. I was going in straight up, like most of you, as an entirely brand new player. And very initially, I was actually very impressed. Now, there are some downsides that come with the territory, like the gender lock classes, stuff like that. Yeah, sure, whatever, it's a Korean game, it is what it is. Where I first started to think, oh, okay, this is kind of snazzy, is actually the very start of the game where I walk across the big sort of cosmic bridge. Oh, and the camera moves. And the scale is actually incredible. The scale's maybe more incredible than I'm used to in games like that. And I'm thinking, okay, this is going somewhere. And then I have to choose my advanced class. I think a lot of the people for Lost Ark, a lot of us actually chose our advanced class before the game actually allowed us to do that. But quite different from what I understand to the intro experience otherwise, like starting off at level 10 with your advanced class. Bam, here's 6 buttons. It can be a little bit sort of confusing, a bit overwhelming for those of us who didn't 100% research the game beforehand. In terms of like researching, not what it is, but play strategies, guides, all of that. Anyway, I go through that. And it's time for the prologue. And I initially start to feel a bit weird about the prologue because I see a massive skip prologue button. And that just makes me think, what? But I'm like, oh, this world is kind of rich, isn't it? I mean, lush, vivid. The general world design, map design is surprisingly solid. And then, I'm able to hit the G key to do things like jump or to navigate across a little thing. Then I kind of think to myself, oh shit, hang on. Those are animations they didn't have to do. And yeah, it's just playing a canned animation, but it's a bit more immersive. It's a bit more fantastical. Nice. The voice acting hits me though. Yeah, it kind of sounds like the voice acting was done on Fiverr with not really that many revisions at the start. The VO actually does, at least for the English localization, improve later on. Though broadly speaking, one of the things that still I'm a little bit iffy on is the quality of that localization. It feels stiff, if I was to use one word. Right, just the way that characters talk, because of course, when you're localizing from one language into the other, it can be quite hard to keep a character's tone. So I think if this game has been localized in the middle of the pandemic with, remote working and stuff like that, it's probably made those voicing sessions not be as effective. So at the start, it's a bit like, whoa, who's this guy? What's that guy? Whoa, it's Morpheus! And you're a little bit confused, you're a little bit off kilter. It's very start-stop in its gameplay. And then, though, you do get some cooler things, right? Some cooler set pieces. And that's when I start to think to myself, okay, this is obviously a game with a surprisingly big budget. This is a game that's done pretty well. It's actually really putting some effort in. Now, for the initial part, I'm kind of thinking you put a lot of effort in, but why is the script really flat? Why are the set pieces, why is it just paced the way that it is? Why have you thrown me into this world where I actually don't understand much at this point? What is the role of my character? A lot of that, player onboarding experience felt a bit rough, and I'm just sort of thinking to myself, okay, this is odd, I'm confused. Then, though, I reach the first town, and I start to feel actually a little bit more placed in this world, if you get my feeling. And that's something that's going to really increase as I get toward the end. But it's time for my first foray into the world. And this is initially where things are jarring, because it went against my expectations. Quests are super short. Side quests are super short. In fact, little dynamic quests can just spawn in when you're running through the world. And initially, I started to be a little bit like, oh, what is up with this stop-start gameplay? I'm not really sure what I should be expecting here. Then it started throwing me into some of those little solo dungeons. And those start to be a little bit better. And then very slowly what happens is I begin to just get into the rhythm, get into the pace. And I suppose that's the thing. Ultimately, this is a Korean MMO being localized over to the West. Clearly, there's some things that are just a little bit different. And once my own expectations sort of actually matched the pacing of the game, what I found was, even when I was still thinking, I'm not sure what to think about this, I had this one more quest thing going on. And I'm sure you've had it as well. As you progress through those zones, you just kind of want to go to the next marker, kill the guys, keep on going. It ends up being quite a Moorish experience to go through, especially then as you start to unlock just one or two of the extra abilities. And you can start to properly customize your character out a little bit. That's before the engravings even come in, right? So it's slowly growing on me. Now, through this entire time, even when I was a little bit lost in the game, the one thing was just those spell effects and that combat feel. Because that's the one thing they've really got right for the type of game that it is. And I mean this on initially, the most base surface level. Because there's the back attacks and there's the weak points and there's all of the depth that actually does exist in this combat system. That is why when you later get into dungeons and when you look at what people say about I think especially the T3 content, but as you move through the raid content, you can see there's a lot of depth in the combat. But the very basic game feel is just great. A bunch of dudes come at you, and you just get to tear them to shreds. And certainly as a Shadow Blade, or a Shadow Hunter, I just found all of my buttons were satisfying. And then especially as I unlocked more buttons, they became super, super satisfying. So it has that pretty good thing going on where you're consistently getting more loot. The player fantasy is generally quite strong. You feel quite powerful. You do cool things. But even when all those things were true for me, I wasn't properly into the game because with some of the stiff dialogue, the inconsistent quality voice acting, there was just some things taking me out of the experience, in addition to the UI being just a little bit in my face. But this slowly begins to melt away. Now, very initially, you're playing with, sort of mostly you're questing around with the priest character. And he's cool enough, right? Where it really starts to get good, though, is when we actually get properly into essentially the power struggle. The power struggle for, for that kingdom. And I think there's a moment. There is a moment where Lost Ark almost certainly grabs a lot of people. For me, there's really two moments. 2.1. The point one is actually just the first proper multiplayer dungeon that I go into. Because I do a boss there, and it's like, okay, this feels pretty good. The first moment, though, truly the first moment, was the Morai dungeon. That dungeon is great. And that is where the game started to impress me. The scale, right? And I'm sure so many of you who have actually jumped into the game have felt this as well. The sheer scale in that dungeon it's just so much bigger than what you've seen before in the game. And you keep on going, and it's a long dungeon, and it's a fun dungeon. You're doing decently varied things as you're going through it. The boss fight where, the dude walks in and then all the warriors just sort of march in your party, and they sort of slowly constrict the play space. That is a really cool boss. It's not like it's the most mechanically crazy thing in the world, but just the way that it's executed is fantastic. And then just all those times where, you hit the G key to do some vaguely interesting movement. And while that's not mechanically mega interesting, it's quite fantastical, isn't it? It just makes the fantasy work. And it's that little bit of extra effort. And Smilegate continually use that they can just use the G key to get you to do some sort of animation to get somewhere. They continually do that to try to make their play spaces just more varied, more interesting. And I really appreciated that. So I did that dungeon. I think I did it in the hard match-made difficulty. Big old splash of loot at the end. And I'm just thinking to myself, okay, the game's has finally bared its teeth. I finally feel it. I finally feel how I could be doing a whole bunch of these dungeons at the end game and really enjoy it. So that was the first point where the game truly, truly clicked for me. But then, the bit of the game clicked for me that I really didn't expect. And that was actually just the main story. Now, I don't mean this from the perspective of I'm suddenly thinking, wow, these are the most in-depth, interesting characters ever. No, I'm not saying that whatsoever. But as a vehicle for some fun set pieces, right? I mean, that's really what a lot of ARPG stories are. It started to work. So as I was just blasting through these zones, you sort of start to get that plot. You kind of get immersed into it. Now, the side quests, sometimes I did the side quests, sometimes I didn't. I didn't feel that I needed to, and to be honest, to me it had seemed like the game where I just want to hit level 50 and really jump into that end game, really get into that super fun hard content. So that is mostly my goal. But still, I'm kind of learning things. I'm moving through a nice variety of zones, seeing some of the local plights. Then, of course, the prince character gets involved. And it's you, the prince, and the priest off on your merry little adventure. And that's where it actually does start to really work quite well. Now, the characters are just there as their archetypes. They act as you would expect, but they're satisfying. They are a pretty good just vehicle for smashing things up. And where it really starts to hit is, of course, the siege. And the siege is the second big thing. And I mean, spoiler-wise, if that's something you care about, I don't think anyone would for Lost Ark, but that's really as far as I'm really going to talk with the story. But that whole siege bit of the story is just fucking cool. As simple as that. And it's one of those moments where I thought, okay, if this was just a grind ARPG, and, to a degree it is going to be, but if it was just that, they probably wouldn't have bothered to make this so cool. And if it was just the sort of thing that people would write off, like, I don't know, a dungeon fighter online, you wouldn't expect it to have been that cool. But no, this sense of scale is there. And I was really impressed how they pulled it off. Like, from that bit where you climb up that siege tower, the camera starts to lift up, you feel some of that scale. It actually starts to feel epic, and then you combine that with just the sheer quantity of characters that are on screen. And then with how, because of the way the combat system is designed, you're constantly staggering enemies, and you're staggering big groups of them, then blasting them down with abilities that just feel so good to press. It's really getting good. So there you are, top the walls. You've got the character call-outs, you've got really just nice set-piece stuff, nice spectacle stuff, way above the production values that I would have expected. I mean, you look at... When you think about games and you think about, a great high-quality set-piece, you don't think that an action RPG or a MMORPG, that they're really going to have that sort of thing. But actually, Lost Ark is quite evidently capable of doing that. And that fundamentally is actually quite exciting. And even just little things like, power sliding your way down the chain to get to the mages who are, putting the big force field thingy in the door. That's just cool. They really nailed that siege. I almost think it's a pity the game didn't start. I mean, there's obviously something to be said for pacing, but man, it's that second dungeon in that siege. They truly, truly grabbed me. I'm just left feeling very satisfied after that. Now, of course, as you move through that siege, you then get into, some of those solo boss fights. And it's funny. They consistently made me feel like such a dumbass purely because I kept on animation locking myself into getting hit by stuff that should be so easy to not be hit by. And then also, I'm just so used to spacebar is dodge, but actually, no, you do have a cooldown on that, and you have to manage your things decently well. But those fights are fun. In the same way that, to me, the Diablo boss fights were always, actually pretty fun in D3 and Reaper of Souls. They were fun to me in that way. And overall, at this point, I'm thinking, okay, it's bared its fangs and sort of sunk itself into my flesh, if that's the analogy that I'm going to go for. And it feels good. I feel gripped. I feel like I want to keep this character going. I want to get more power. I want to see more of those set pieces. See more of the dungeons that they have available. That's where the game finally clicked for me. About level 25, 26, 27, 28. And then, of course, you unlock the big city. Big city's pretty damn cool. And that's where I started to realize, oh shit. The game's actually opening up to me right now, isn't it? Because then I'm taken to my stronghold. And I go through the initial quest for the stronghold, and I'm thinking, oh, okay. And then there's the engravings, there's all the other things. And I'm just thinking to myself, right, this game is expanding out. And then you, of course, remember to right-click on the map enough that you see the multi-continent world map. And then you realize, bloody hell, Lost Ark is absolutely massive. And then, of course, I remember that at some point I'll be able to get a boat, go to different islands, and do things in the islands. So it's a rather big game. It's a rather big game, and that is absolutely a strength of a game that, see, from what I understand, Lost Ark basically was a bit laughed at in Korea for a time, but they turned it around in the most spectacular fashion. And I think now we're at a situation where basically there's just so much content, so much development has went into this game, and in fact, there are really nice quality of life features that are going to be hitting the Korean version before they hit the Western version, that show that the devs are like really just clued in and get it. And then, of course, you think about Lost Ark Online, it's not called Lost Ark Online Live, whatever it is, the sort of 7-hour, basically Big Yoshi P live stream style thing that they do. And then you start to think, oh, wait, shit, there seems to be pretty ample reason to have a lot of faith in this game. So that, at its essence, is the core of why I initially got a bit confused with Lost Ark. I didn't click. But then, through the quality of a bunch of that content and the core game feel being excellent, Lost Ark actually did click for me. And that does mean that I'm going to be continuing to play Lost Ark. Now, in terms of what has piqued my interest, what's been of note to me, I think that real earnest effort that they make in the production value, I really like that. And I think as I go on to more and more modern content that'll be benefiting from a higher budget, or just for more experience, they've shown me they can make real cool shit. And then that's in the very base starting experience. So I'm excited to see how that goes. That's one thing. The next thing then is combat. So yeah, Shadowhunter. Man, now that I've actually started to play around with my abilities, like I haven't really found a build perfect yet. And I've purposefully, I'm not looking up guides and things like that. I like to go into these games completely blind without research. You might think, well, is it not your job to know? No, actually, I'm not really doing guide content. I'm doing experiential content. And I want to see how these games are able to onboard me to their experience. So as I play around with these, I'm beginning to think like, okay, there's really nice build diversity here. There are lots of satisfying buttons. And then with the tripods, you sort of fine-tune those abilities. And I found that to be very satisfying. Actually, for Shadowhunter, and have some of my ranged kits really fun. I then have the big one where, you just transform into a massive demon and do 3 massive slashes. All with spectacular sound effects and spectacular visual effects, which, by the way, you can tone down for other players in the settings. And certainly there are times where I would recommend toning down other people's spell effects just because, it could get pretty intense. I mean, even in FF14, that's something that I do. So that core combat feel is something that right now I'm really just meshing with. And I can imagine the PvP in this game absolutely banging. So that seems like a very, very exciting thing. And I can't remember if the game was Battle Right, but I just remember there was this brawler game that Total Biscuit liked. And I think, I don't know, for whatever reason, seeing his video on that all, back in the day, it's just made me quite excited about the idea of PvP within an action RPG, which is something that's wholly new to me. Of course, I remember people talking about PvP for Diablo 3, but that, didn't really materialize, did it? And then, of course, the strongholds. Now, it's funny, the strongholds are so much. I see basically the mission table system, and that stuff's, iffy to me, mixed, whatever, but I'm willing to believe they can actually do it pretty decently here. I know there's other interesting things that go on with those ships, but it does seem like there's a lot to keep you busy with the strongholds. It also seems like the strongholds, as they go into crafting and all that all seems to be quite interesting. Again, for crafting, it's something that I've skipped because I really just want to hit level 50 and get into that level 50 content. But, from the initial bit that it tutorialized for me, I thought it looked kind of neat. Plus, I mean, for me, there is just something about with an isometric game, just doing crafting in that, or gathering even, it's kind of nostalgic to me because of my time playing RuneScape as a kid. So the strongholds seem really cool. I want to customize that more. I've seen a lot of pretty cool customizations that people have done, so I really like that. This core level up flow, I'm really enjoying. Now that I'm actually customizing my abilities, I really appreciate what they're doing on the Shadowhunter, and I'm finding it to be really enjoyable. And I think the game is opening itself up and showing a sense of scale that actually... Matt described hitting that big city after the siege as, I think he called it mental waterboarding. Just because, like, he was, getting the engravings and then getting the strongholds, and it's like, holy shit, I'm being waterboarded with game mechanics. Now, that could come off as being a little bit too strong, but I think purely based on the back of how bloody cool that siege was, I'm in. So that's my first impressions of Lost Ark. I think that the visual presentation is generally fantastic. It's a lovely, rich world to be in, so I'm really happy with the visual presentation. The combat, I'm really, really, really enjoying. The dungeons, especially the second dungeon that I did, are fantastic. They show a level of ambition and scale that is way beyond what I actually expected from a game like this. And then just for the broad game systems, it seems like there's a massive amount there. And then in terms of my faith in the game and faith in the development team, well, number one, we've got the story of its turnaround in the Korean market. So that gives you a lot of faith. Then there's the quality of the large presentations that the development team do. There is how the development team has generally been quite honest about the mistakes that they've made, and how, I looked at some of the changes that are coming up in the Korean version, and they really seem to be good. I mean, I'm kind of sitting there thinking, oh, darn, I wish they were here in the Western version, which is, in a way bad, but I think more importantly, overall very good. It shows the core development team get it, and obviously that's just they're not being perfect feature parity. That's just something that comes with the territory of a game that is being localized into other territories. I would like to change my voice acting to Korean and give that a spin. They did tweet as of 2 hours ago. I think there was a bug with that because I changed mine to Korean and then basically all the sound effects broke. I think that's fixed now, so I'll have to jump in and see what the Korean is like. Perhaps the performances are more engaging there. And again, even another thing that comes from South Korea, in fact, Squid Game. It's really strange where basically the subs on Squid Game are like nowhere near as good as the actual script for Squid Game, especially as it would be, like as a Korean person watching it in Korea would find it. So I think it could just be a better, more fun experience swapping over to the Korean VO, but of course with English subs. So that's essentially my Lost Ark experience. I'm in. I don't really know what else there is to say. I'll do an update video probably when I hit max level or just when there's something else notable to say. But essentially that is how the game lost me initially and why, how it won me back again, and now how I'm thinking, okay, this has got legs, this has got promise, I'm excited, I am in. So what's your Lost Ark experience been? And let me know down below, and I suppose that's it for the video. Enjoy, have fun, and I'll see you next time.